Hi guys, so let's go ahead and wrap up the digestive system before we move on to the reproductive system finally, the last chapter. Excuse me, before I get started, I wanted to point out to you that I have added a new discussion. I am continuing to add questions to it. I'm asking you to answer one of the questions, one of the unanswered questions in this discussion. And there is an additional extra credit point up for grabs here. I know 1 point doesn't sound like very much, but consider that the discussion boards count for 15% of your grade. With 5 points out there for you, that means that this extra credit point will be worth about 3%. Okay, so not bad. If the class was worth 1,000 points, this would be a 30-point assignment. So go ahead and read the instructions here and grab that extra point for your discussion board. And we're off on the rest of the digestive system. We left off talking about the stomach. And so we are going to continue on down past the stomach and into the small intestine. Okay, so at the base of the stomach, the distal end of the stomach, you have the pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter leads into or separates the stomach from the first portion of your small intestine, which is called the duodenum. Okay, so the duodenum is the first segment of your small intestine. It is only about 10 inches long. It is relatively short, but it does the vast majority of the digesting and absorption that your small intestine does. The duodenum is the place where the bile and the pancreatic juices from your liver, gallbladder, and pancreas enter into your digestive system and help with the digestion of your food from there. The next segment of the small intestine is called the jejunum. So that's basically like the middle part. And this is about 8 feet long, all in there, all coiled up in there. Also does digestion and absorption, just not quite as much. And then lastly, the ileum is the final, most distal segment of your small intestine. And it goes into the large intestine, okay? Your small intestine ends at the ileocecal valve. So between the ileum and the cecum is the ileocecal valve, okay? So basically your small intestine is bordered on either side by the pyloric sphincter, which separates it from the stomach, and the ileocecal valve, which separates it from the large intestine. In addition to the peristaltic contractions that move food through the small intestine in a similar way that it does through the esophagus, you have what are called segmentation contractions, which are done by smooth muscle. But instead of having a ring of contracted smooth muscle move steadily down from the proximal to the distal end of the tube, you have contractions or rings of contractions that basically kind of go back and forth and all around the food, which at this point is called chyme. Technically, chyme is the term. It's a bolus when you swallow it into your stomach, and then it turns into chyme when it goes into the intestines. But I'm not going to be really weird and picky about that. Just an FYI. But the segmentation contractions or segmental contractions, the purpose of those is to break food up and to mix it and to decrease the surface area of the food as much as possible. So you're just trying to basically form like one mass of the food. I also wanted to point out here the layers of the wall of the small intestine have the same 3 layers as the rest of your digestive system tract so far, right? We've talked about having a mucosa of epithelial tissue, a submucosa of connective tissue, a muscularis externa, which is just the muscle layer of the the alimentary tube, right? So from your esophagus all the way down to your rectum, you have muscle, smooth muscle in the walls of your alimentary tube. And then finally the serous membrane or serosa or adventitia, depending on where you're at. So don't worry too much about which one of those you describe, that final outer wall of the alimentary tube. I will accept any of them, but I just wanted to show you here again one more time, the mucosa, which is this part here. The submucosa is basically from here to really here. And then you have your muscularis underneath there and the serosa on top of that. Note here that you do have villi or microvilli in the small intestine. So this microvilli is going to increase the surface area of that inner wall of the small intestine to increase absorption. So as digestion is happening and nutrients are becoming free to be absorbed into the bloodstream, you have a whole lot more surface area than you would if it was just a smooth wall for those nutrients to pass through the mucosa and enter the submucosa and the bloodstream, okay? So the inside of the small intestine kind of looks like it's got a nice shag carpet layer. All right, so since we're talking about the small intestine, I thought we'd go ahead and jump into the accessory organs of the digestive system. This is including the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. And all of these guys are basically coming into play at the duodenum, so that first 10 inches of the small intestine. Your liver has a lot of different functions, so we are actually going to be doing some blood filtration. We're going to be removing toxins or neutralizing toxins, removing drugs, alcohol. It's also responsible for regulating the levels of carbohydrates, of glucose, of different lipids and amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, in the blood. Okay, so it actually regulates those levels in the blood. So blood from the GI tract makes its way to that hepatic trunk that we talked about when we talked about the vascular system. That hepatic trunk, hepatic as in liver, sends that blood through the liver to be filtered before returning back to the heart and lungs. Your liver has 4 lobes. There's only 2 that you can really see from the outside. The right lobe is the much larger half, basically, of the liver. And then the left lobe is the smaller portion. This is according to the patient, right? So this would be patient's left. And the quadrate and caudate lobes, those guys are actually on the underside of the liver. So you would have to get a posterior inferior view of the liver to get a glimpse of those, which I kind of have here. The quadrate and the caudate lobes are basically here and here. Don't worry about it too much. I really am mostly interested in you knowing the right and left lobes of the liver. Okay, so focus on those. The right lobe, which is here, and the left lobe, which is here. Okay. Your liver produces bile in addition to its blood filtering capacity. It produces bile salts, which are basically providing an environment where enzymes, digestive enzymes, can be the most active, basically. So bile is actually produced by the cells of the liver and by the smallest functional units of the liver, which we'll talk about in a minute, the lobules. Bile is produced by them. It filters down, down, down through the left and right hepatic ducts, which are these little green tubes coming down out of the liver to join this, which is the common hepatic duct. Okay, so you have a left hepatic duct, basically just a channel for all the bile that all of the cells inside of the liver on the left side is making, channeling down to this large common hepatic duct, and the right hepatic duct is doing the same thing for this side of the liver. And that bile traveling down the common hepatic duct from there ends up joining up with both the cystic duct of the gallbladder and the pancreatic duct from the pancreas into the common bile duct, which empties into the duodenum, that first part of your small intestine. Okay, so we've got a few things here in the pancreas to look at. Okay, we're going to talk about the pancreas and the gallbladder here separately, so don't panic yet. This is one of those small microscopic subunits of the liver. This is a liver lobule. So each one of these is a liver lobule. They have this really bizarre hexagonal six-sided shape, and they're made up of these hepatocytes, which are basically just liver cells surrounding a central vein. And at each of the 6 corners, you have a little trifecta of tubes. You have another vein, you have an artery, a hepatic artery, and then you have a little portion of the bile duct. Okay, so whether or not this is going to lead to the left hepatic duct or the right hepatic duct depends on where in the liver this liver lobule is. Okay, so so your entire liver, if you were going to zoom in, if you look at a slide of liver tissue, you would see this weird pattern. It may be more clear in some places than in others, but generally speaking, the liver lobules have a 6-sided shape surrounding a central vein. And at each corner, you'll have a vein, an artery, and a little tube, which is going to basically lead to the hepatic duct, which will lead to either the right or the left hepatic duct, which will lead to the common hepatic duct. We call that trifecta a portal triad. Okay. This unit, these lobules, have the function of actually all the functions of the liver. So the liver has this layout throughout its entire bulk. And these cells, these hepatocytes, are responsible for all of the stuff that the liver does. So they produce bile. There are bile-producing cells here, as well as filtering mechanisms. So the blood from the veins in the portal triads actually is going to filter through the hepatocytes to get to that central vein. And then the blood traveling from the central veins is going to end up going back to that hepatic trunk, the portion that goes to the inferior vena cava, which is going to return to the heart to be reoxygenated. So basically, blood is coming from the GI tract to the liver. You have central veins going through all of these liver lobules, and all of that blood gets filtered in the liver and travels back into the hepatic trunk to the inferior vena cava and back to the heart. Meanwhile, the hepatocytes are also producing bile and sending it down these little bile ducts to either the right or the left hepatic duct. All right, your gallbladder, and here's a nice posterior inferior view of our liver here. So if we're looking from behind and slightly underneath the liver, okay, you've got your inferior vena cava, you've got the hepatic veins coming off of the hepatic trunk, you've got the right lobe of the liver, the left lobe of the liver, and then you can also in this view see the caudate and the quadrate lobes of the liver as well. So they're really only visible from the underside there. But what I want to emphasize on this slide is your gallbladder. So your gallbladder is this weird thin-walled sac that is often colored green, and it may actually be green in real life when it's full of bile. So bile is a yellow, it's like this neon yellow color. You may recognize it from like dry heaving after a terrible bout of food poisoning or a bad hangover. That horrible acidic fluid is at least partially that bile. And its bitterness and its acidity is the reason why it's good at digesting lipids and proteins, amino acids, and that type of thing. So basically, your gallbladder is going to be in charge of storing extra bile that your liver produces. Okay, so your liver is making all this bile, it's sending it down the right and left hepatic ducts to the common hepatic duct. That common hepatic duct is going to also meet with the cystic duct, which is the name of the duct that goes from the gallbladder to the common hepatic duct. Okay, so we have a duct system that we're building here, right? So far we have the liver, we've got a right hepatic duct draining basically the right side of the liver of bile. The left hepatic duct is draining the left lobe of the liver. They come down and meet and form the common hepatic duct. That comes down, the cystic duct joins it, and then it continues down on our way to the small intestine, and it's also going to meet up with the duct of the pancreas before we get to the duodenum as well. Okay, so the cystic duct is the tube from the gallbladder, and the bile duct is basically what this continues into before we get to the small intestine. Okay. All right, so we are storing extra bile in the gallbladder. That's its main function. Okay. Okay. Here is the pancreas. So the pancreas is kind of tucked up here in the curve of the duodenum. How sweet, right? Here's the gallbladder. We've got the liver removed in this slide. So this is the common hepatic duct that we're looking at here. C, and that's an H. Oh, what a mess. The common hepatic duct is what we call it when it goes from the liver to the cystic duct. After the cystic duct, it becomes the bile duct. I'm going to move my face over here for a second. Okay, so I can get that nice and clear for you. So from this point, where the cystic duct meets up with the hepatic duct, after that point, this becomes the bile duct. And the bile duct will continue on to here, and it will meet up with the pancreatic duct, which is this whole guy right here. And all of those juices, both the bile and the pancreatic juices, will combine and enter into the duodenum. Okay, so we've got several things happening here. Once again, the right and left hepatic ducts of the liver will merge into the common hepatic duct. When the cystic duct joins it, the remaining tube becomes the bile duct, and it is going to continue down until it joins the pancreatic duct before entering the duodenum, so that the bile and the pancreatic juices can enter the small intestine to aid in the digestion of proteins. Proteases are the word we have for the enzymes that digest proteins. Amylase, we did hear this word before. Remember, salivary amylase starts to break down starches. So we have amylase also in the pancreatic juice. Lipases digest lipids. Nucleases digest nucleic acids. And the pancreatic juice is more basic than like your stomach acid or the bile, because it needs to protect a little bit these enzymes. Okay, so these enzymes would be broken down by such a strong acid. This is why this is happening in the duodenum and not in the stomach proper, okay? So, oh, and don't forget that your pancreas also produces insulin, right? Which is a hormone, because your pancreas is also an endocrine gland. So we are kind of joining the endocrine system to the digestive system here, right? Okay, so here's everything put together and a much clearer picture of the duct system that we're talking about here. So the common bile duct is the main duct here, okay? It's the main one, the bile duct. We've got a bunch of things that join in to become the bile duct. First, we have the right and left hepatic ducts, which are here and here, respectively. Where they join, you have the common hepatic duct, where the cystic duct meets them. From that point down, we have the bile duct, which joins the pancreatic duct, before entering the duodenum. Okay? All right, so gotta get your ducts, you gotta get your ducts in a row. I just came up with that right now. Pretty proud of it. Okay, so after the duodenum, that little 10-inch section of your small intestine, we move into the jejunum, which is like 8 feet long of small intestine, and does similar things to the duodenum. And then finally the ileum, which is the last part of your small intestine, and it's like 12 feet long. It's super long, kind of creepy there. And they're all hanging out here in the middle of your peritoneum. The ileum is going to go directly into the large intestine. And the large intestine wraps up and around all of your small intestines. Okay, so you've got your little small intestines here in the middle, and then your large intestine is going to come up and wrap around in kind of like a square. Okay, so here's the end of the ileum right here. And the entryway into the large intestine from the small intestine is called the ileocecal valve. Okay, you could also call it a sphincter. It's basically a sphincter. Okay, so the ileocecal valve leads into the cecum, which is this pouch right here. In one direction from the cecum, you go to the rest of the large intestine, or the colon, if you will, also called the colon. The other direction will take you to the appendix. The appendix is important because it contains basically a reservoir of gut bacteria, of good, healthy gut bacteria, and it can replenish the large intestine if gut bacteria come out of balance or are destroyed, say with the use of antibiotics or something like that. But if you get that tiny little entrance to your appendix blocked by food matter coming in through the ileocecal valve, the appendix can swell and eventually rupture. And if it ruptures, then all of that bacteria is going to end up in the peritoneum. So it'll end up in your actual abdominal cavity. And while this bacteria is good when it's in your digestive system, it is very bad if it's in your peritoneum. So if it breaches the wall of the alimentary tube or the GI tract and it goes into the body cavity, it is now like been set loose on your body and your immune system will go haywire. So this bacteria is not part of you. It lives in you. You live with it symbiotically. But the deal is that it has to stay inside of the GI tract. And that way it is protected from your immune system. And your immune system and the gut bacteria have this agreement. And actually the gut bacteria tells the immune system to back off when it's in the GI tract. But once it leaves, that protection is lost and your immune system will go crazy. you'll end up with an infection in the peritoneum, which can be fatal. So that's why you get an appendectomy, which is a removal of your appendix, because it's not really critical to life. But if you're like me and you don't have an appendix and you had an appendectomy at some point in your life, you need to take your probiotics to keep your gut flora nice and healthy, especially after you take antibiotics, if you take antibiotics. So with that PSA out of the way, from the ileocecal valve, we have the cecum. In one direction, you have the appendix. In the other, we have the ascending colon. Okay, so the ascending colon is going up. All right. From the ascending colon, we have the part that goes across, and so we call it the transverse colon. Okay, everything that I'm putting a box around is what you need to know. If it doesn't have a box around it, then you don't need to know it, okay? Once we get through the transverse colon, we go into the descending colon because we are going down. And then from the descending colon, we take this kind of S-shaped curve right here. And that is why we call it the sigmoid colon. And my sigmoid got cut off, so I'm gonna, or my colon got cut off. Ooh, that sounds bad. Colon, sigmoid colon is this S-shaped part right here, which leads directly into the rectum right there, which will eventually terminate in the anal canal, and then the anal opening, or the anus as we know it, okay? So the ileocecal valve is the entry into the large intestine. The anus is the end of the line. So your large intestine doesn't do any digesting. Everything that was going to be broken down has been in the stomach and the small intestine. Instead, the large intestine is now responsible for absorbing vitamins, minerals, and the remaining water from the chyme that enters into it. Okay, so basically you are pulling out any of the remaining water out of what will eventually become feces. You are pulling vitamins and minerals, many of which are produced by your gut bacteria. So going back to the gut bacteria for a second, your gut bacteria populates your small and your large intestine. And when it gets fed by your food, because that's the other half of the symbiosis, right? You feed it, and then in return, the metabolites from eating some of your food are important vitamins and minerals that we need as humans. So that's the symbiosis. We give them some food, and then after digesting that food, these little bacteria produce vitamins for us as a byproduct of eating some of our food. So the large intestine is responsible for absorbing those vitamins into our bloodstream. Notice all of the rich vascularization occurring around the large intestine. The entire GI tract, of course, is very, very highly vascularized. You may notice after you eat, actually, that you might get a little bit cold. And that's because all of the blood that is normally in your skin, because your skin is a reservoir, travels into your digestive system to help with digestion, right? After you eat. So it might make you a little bit chilly after you eat. That's why. But yeah, that's where all these nutrients are going, right? They're traveling through the mucosa, through the submucosa, into the blood vessels that are there in the submucosa. Other important aspects of the colon, you do have smooth muscle, but it's arranged kind of strangely here. It's arranged in this sort of a ribbon right down the center. And when it contracts, it kind of forms these pockets. So The large intestine does do kind of like peristaltic contractions, but it's more of kind of a weird wriggling that happens. But it does use its smooth muscle to work that chyme all the way up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, down the descending colon, through the sigmoid colon, into the rectum, before it gets deposited as feces. Your anal canal, by the way, does also have an internal and an external sphincter. Not unlike your urethra. No. My dog is scratching at the door. And not unlike your urethra, the internal sphincter is involuntary, but the external sphincter is voluntary, which is important, right? We want to choose when and where we evacuate our bowels. So the external sphincter is voluntary. Okay. Very important. Absorbs water, absorbs metabolites from gut bacteria, which is basically vitamins and minerals. Wow. Sorry for this weird delay with my iPad. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm gonna have to just write slowly. I apologize for that. Okay. Oh, one more picture and a more distinct description of the smooth muscle of the large intestine. The technical term is Tenier coli. I'm not super worried about you knowing that. I just want you to know that it does have a muscularis layer, but that it is reduced to this strange ribbon-like structure going down the center and causing this sort of pocket-like infolding, which are called haustra. Okay, so these pockets, like this one haustrum, are called haustra. Okay. We do need to know about the cecum, the appendix, the ileocecal valve, the ileum, the rectum, the anal canal, your external anal sphincter, and then the 4 parts of the colon: ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. Okay. Not worried about anything else here. All right, so if it's been underlined or boxed, that's what you need to know. Those are the 5 parts of your large intestine, starting at the cecum, including the appendix, the ascending, transverse, and descending and sigmoid colon, the rectum, and finally the anal canal, which has both an internal and an external sphincter. Okay, your digestive system has kind of its own portion of your brain power that goes to it. We call it the enteric nervous system. Okay, so the enteric nervous system is the part of your nervous system dedicated to making sure that your digestive system works. And it works in 2 different ways. You have your internal stimuli, which includes input from mechanoreceptors in both your esophagus and your stomach, which detect stretch, right? So your stretch receptors are basically telling your brain that food is in the pipeline, it's on its way. But even ahead of that, you have external stimuli, just seeing, smelling, tasting, or thinking of food will activate your central nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, to start the digestion process. So that includes salivation. It includes the production of stomach acid. It includes the production of bile and pancreatic juices, all these things. your stomach and your small intestine start to do its smooth muscle contractions, whether something really is there or not. Hence the stomach rumbling, right? Your stomach rumbling is when your empty stomach is kind of churning and there's nothing in there except for liquid and maybe some gas. And so you hear the bubbling of that. Yeah, so short reflexes are just considered those that are due to internal stimuli, so those stretch receptors and chemoreceptors as well, causing local nerve plexuses to activate without the help of the brain, basically, which causes smooth muscle and glands to be activated. And then your external stimuli can be happening at the same time or before, but it's considered a long reflex, which basically adds to the same thing. So either way, external or internal stimuli lead to basically the same types of things, which are the activation of chemo and mechanoreceptors and the activation of smooth muscle and glands. In case it wasn't clear, this is part of your autonomic nervous system. It happens without you really thinking about it, right? Okay, finally, some digestive system disorders, the big ones for you here. Tooth decay, right? So basically, eating really anything or anything that breaks down into sugar can leave a scum of sugar on your teeth. The good bacteria of your mouth normally are going to compete any bad bacteria, but if you get an imbalance, then bacteria that's feeding on the sugar on the surface of your teeth, that combined sugar bacteria amalgam is known as a dental plaque. And that dental plaque will eventually lead to the breakdown of your enamel, because the bacteria eating the sugar produce acid as a result, and that's going to break down the enamel. And once you get past the enamel, you get to that soft inner dentin. And once you get into the dentin, it digests much faster thanks to the bacteria. And then eventually you get to the pulp, and it gets very painful. And then you need to get a filling. That's what we call a cavity, right? Once this process starts, in addition to going into the surface of the tooth, you may also see this dental plaque extend down in between the tooth and the gums, so beneath the crown of the tooth. And once you separate the gum line from the tooth itself, other stuff can start getting stuck in there. Bacteria makes its way in there. Your gums can get inflamed. They will like recede. And that's what we call gingivitis, since the gingiva is your gums. Right? So both of these really are caused by the dental plaque, which is the combination of sugar on your teeth and the bacteria eating that sugar on your teeth. All right, kind of moving down the systems here. Acid reflux is when your gastroesophageal or cardiac sphincter doesn't close all the way, and the stomach acid makes its way up past the gastroesophageal sphincter and starts to burn the mucosa of your esophagus above the sphincter. Since that region is behind your heart, you can mistake it for pain in and around your heart, and that's why we call it heartburn. Okay. In the stomach now, ulcers are basically places in the stomach mucosa and the lining where that mucosa and the mucus barrier has been broken down, and the acid starts to digest the walls of the stomach itself. So this is obviously an extremely painful condition. And it was for a long time thought to be caused by stress, but it's generally not. Most ulcers are actually caused by bacteria, which are resistant to the acid of the stomach. So once you get that bacteria taken care of, as long as you keep some food in your stomach, you can heal the ulcer usually if it hasn't gotten too far, by basically just keeping food in there, basically diluting the stomach acid so it doesn't eat away at the submucosa, the mucosa, the submucosa, faster than it can rebuild itself. Hepatitis, so inflammation of the liver, right? Because HEPA is liver related. Oh. Well, you went too fast for it again. Inflammation of the liver. Hepatitis can be caused by toxins. So literally you can get certain forms of hepatitis just by ingesting so many toxins that your liver is chronically inflamed from constantly working. But it also is, of course, caused by viruses. Hepatitis C is the famous one caused by a virus, and it's the only one that's not the only one, but it's one of the ones that is that can be contagious because it is caused by a virus. So hepatitis is not necessarily viral, or even contagious. It's just inflammation of the liver. But certain ones can be caused by viruses. Cirrhosis of the liver is when you have a lot of scar tissue in the liver because of chronic hepatitis, basically. So chronic inflammation of the liver can lead to cirrhosis, where it cannot rejuvenate itself faster than it's being destroyed. So the liver has this really cool ability to regrow if you lose part of it, which is why you can donate part of your liver to somebody else and live to tell the tale. But at a certain point, if it's too inflamed, it cannot regenerate itself any longer. And you move into cirrhosis, which is really just kind of end stage liver failure from chronic inflammation. And there's obviously a lot more. You've got your pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas, pancreatic cancer, which is very bad, irritable bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, and all of those syndromes around that, leaky gut, all of these things having to do with the small and large intestines and dysfunctions of those. But I wanted to include appendicitis, which I already talked about. So this is when you have a little blockage in that narrow end of the tube that goes into the cecum. Since you can no longer expel the bacterial contents of the appendix itself, it backs up, the appendix stretches and can possibly burst, which could lead to a systemic infection, which is obviously very bad, right? And that is it for the digestive system, you guys. I will meet you back here for our last chapter, chapter 27, the reproductive system. And once again, please do not forget to go and visit our last discussion board, cardiovascular system discussion 2. Make sure that you are contributing to all of the discussion boards, because again, these discussions, they doesn't seem like they're worth very much, but that 1 point correlates to 15% of your grade. So make sure that you do these. It's super simple. It's ask a question, answer a question. Okay, so part 1 is always ask a question. Part 2 is answer a question. And make sure that you read the directions carefully to get your extra credit point. All right, you guys, and I will meet you back here for the reproductive system. Bye-bye.